Good morning. My name is Chris Holman. I'm an associate teaching professor in the School of Social Information, Justice, and Social Inquiry program. I actually teach a class on Holocaust and human rights. So that last presentation was really spectacular. And I'm very honored to present our next presenter in the series today. Wai Wai Nu, it's from the Women's Peace Network. Nu is the founder and executive director of the Women's Peace Network, an organization that advocates for the rights of marginalized women in Burma, especially in Rakhine State, and seeks to build peace and mutual understanding between Burma's ethnic communities. A former political prisoner, Nu has dedicated her work to advancing democracy, human rights, and peace in her country. To engage with youth, she founded Yangon Youth Leadership Center, where she provides civic and political education and leadership training. In 2014, she co-founded Just for Women in Yangon, a legal advocacy organization that works with victims of gender-based violence. She was named one of the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leaders in 2018, one of Time Magazine's Next Generation Leaders in 2017, and one of the Financial Times Women of the Year in 2018, and won 100 World Thinkers by Foreign Policy Magazine in 2015. She received numerous international awards for her work, including NP's Awards in 2014 and the City of Athens Democracy Awards in 2021. In recent years, she has been a fellow at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and a visiting scholar at Columbia University. Currently, she is serving as a visiting senior research fellow at the Human Rights Center, University of California, Berkeley School of Law, where she received her Master of Law degree. Please welcome Wai Wai Nu.
Very much for this generous introduction. It's my honor to be here, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It was incredibly inspiring and easy in presentation by Daniel, and I feel every time I think about it, I visited the whole Auschwitz. And every time I think about the survivors and victims of the Jewish community, my heart just aches. And it still feels like a surreal, but this is a testament of how human can do to other humans. And in fact, that history is still repeated. It might not be exactly identical, but a lot of similarities. The last note that Marianne was saying is that the Holocaust happened in Germany during the democracy, and the Rohingya genocide, mass attack, was happened during the so-called democracy in Burma. So there are, we may be able to study deeply around the patterns of genocide and processes of genocide, but also there are other similarities that we have to take into consideration and pay attention to. Democracy alone cannot protect persecution, discrimination, or genocide. With that being said, let me introduce myself a little bit, although it was introduced already. Okay, so yes, I'm a Rohingya, a lawyer who studied legal professions, and I am a former political prisoner. Currently running an organization called Women's Peace Network. We actually work on documentation for human rights for the past 8-9 years, and we have been doing extensive advocacy domestically and internationally to bring justice for the survivors of genocide and other atrocity crimes in Burma. Currently, I'm also studying genocide and mass atrocity prevention. My goal in life, my mission is to actually bring peace, human rights, justice, and democracy to people of Burma. And today, my goal is to showcase how atrocity crimes are being committed in Myanmar, including genocide, and to encourage you to take actions. Sorry. So who is the Rohingya? Who are the Rohingya? Rohingya is an ethnic and religious minority and indigenous to Burma, although the military and vast majority of the population does not recognize as such. We have lived in Burma for centuries before, during and after British and Japanese occupation colonies. Rohingya is a majority Muslim population, and we speak Burmese and Rohingya language. Okay. It is important for me to, when we talk about Rohingya genocide, to touch about the Rohingya history and who the Rohingya actually is, because genocide is wrong, targeting the group for their existence and eliminating their existence and their history and their identity itself. And I think that is why it is very important to not to dismiss that aspect of the genocide itself. So, like I said earlier, we are a group indigenous to Burma, and denial of our existence and identity and history itself is a genocide for us. Itself is a trauma and a lot of mental pressure that the community continue to carry to these days. So Burma got independence from British in 1948, and since then we have established a new Burma where many ethnic communities from different parts of the territories of current Burma came together, formed a democratic country as a coming together federalism. However, there is a lot of discussions and politics behind the practices or distributions of power to the different ethnic communities, and we still have like one of the long-lasting civil war in Burma with the many different ethnic communities and majority Burmese population. However, ever since we become a new nation, the Rohingya were being recognized as a Burmese national. The first prime minister, namely Ulu, in 1954 said the majority of the nationals residing in Maundo and Bukidong, which is where Rohingya Muslims are and have been staying, are Rohingya and who are Muslim. And the Constituent Assembly was established in 1947, and we even before, during the period of independence and during the struggle for the independence, Rohingya were part of it. We Rohingya were part of the Burma's history and struggle from the prior independence to today, and we were active in all aspects of the country's society. These are some pictures. The top is the Rohingya Student Association with the name Rohingya Student Association at Rangoon University in the mid-1950s. At the bottom, these are members of the Rohingya parliamentarian in early days of new independent nation, 1940 to 1960. Just to note that Rohingya were able to participate in all of the Burmese elections and had our representation until 2010 election. So my father himself was an elected parliamentarian in 1990 elections, where the military finally didn't transfer the power and put the political politicians and political activists in prisons. These are some of the examples of Rohingya being recognized as Burmese citizens and given national identification card, which were similar with the similar card issued to the other national citizens of the country. And it was in 1962, the military general Ne Win took the stage, and ever since he promoted his military right, promoted Buddhist ethnic Burmans' identity by restricting rights of the ethnic and religious minorities, mostly ethnic minorities. And in 1982, there was a citizenship law issued based on ethnic identity. So they have come up with a list of ethnic nationalities. Those who are not on the list of the ethnic nationality, then they cannot become full citizens or birth citizens of the country, where Rohingya are removed from the list. So that's when the start of the beginning of the Rohingyas persecution. And then the military took away national registration card, which was the national identity card from Rohingya, and replaced with a temporary registration card in early 1990s. And now the Rohingya are portrayed as immigrants from Bangladesh and calling them as Bangalo. So one note around this is that genocide has been taken place, or genocide have been taken place in different forms and different processes. For the Rohingya, it wasn't like an incident that happened within a short period of time. It is a long process. And that's why a lot of scholars describe the Rohingya genocide as slow burning genocide. So basically, the policies of persecutions were introduced over the period of several decades. And without policies and practices of persecution, the Burmese military has not only been able to take away their history, their wealth, their prosperity, education, and everything they had, but also their dignity and livelihood and existence itself in Burma. So that's what happened, and it's happened over the course of 30 to 40 years of time, and it continues to happen today. And one of the massive crackdown or massive attacks against the Rohingya happened in 1970s. And in 1978, the military introduced an operation called Dragon Operation, where the military deployed a lot of security forces to Rakhine State, where Rohingya are living, and basically scrutinize every Rohingya and verify whether they are citizens or not. And along this process, they basically abuse or introduce a lot of the abusive practices and massive violations of human rights, including killings, arbitrary arrests, rape, removal of people from their land, and a lot of torture, a lot of other abuses, and people had to flee to Bangladesh. It was about 250,000 people at that time in 1978 fled to Bangladesh, and with the facilitations of the UNHCR, they were able to come back because they were able to prove that they were citizens of Burma and they had identity card. It happened in 1978. And because they were able to come back by showing their identity card, the military regime came up with a new strategy to remove their identity card. And that's how they introduced new citizenship cards, so that when next time happens, they may not be able to come back. They cannot prove that they may not be able to prove that they are citizens. So that's how the citizenships and more strategic forms of persecutions were or policies were introduced. So alongside all of this happening to the Rohingya, many other ethnic communities were targeted as well in different forms. And especially ethnic minorities like Chin, Kachin, Karen, Shan, and Rakhine were targeted for many forms of discriminations, and a lot of those places, civil wars were constantly happening, and whereas many atrocities occurred in different incidences, different time of the different years of the period. So like Rohingya, many the military attacks have forced hundreds of thousands of ethnic minorities to flee to their homes and become refugees in neighboring countries such as Bangladesh, India, and Thailand. So we still have a lot of refugees in Thailand and India besides Bangladesh, Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. According to the United Nations and other international bodies, these attacks amount to war crimes, crimes against humanity. For Rohingya, it's amount to genocide. So, we're going to deeper tactics of genocide. I would also want to say that there was another incident in there were another operations against the Rohingya in 1991, where they called it Bidaya, New Nation Operations, where the same tactics were utilized from 1978 and caused about 200,000 Rohingya to flee Bangladesh. And in this time, I guess 2/3 of the populations were able to come back, again with the UNHCR facilitation. But a lot of them were left behind, still living in the Bangladesh refugee camps. Those who were able to come back, they were not restored their rights, or they were not restituted their land. And after that, since 1991, when the second flood of refugees came back, the new military leaderships were put in place in Burma. And ever since, they introduced a more severe forms of discriminations and persecution that include a lot of the policies that restrict people's livelihood, ability to travel from one village to another village, or ability to give birth or marry. It is the only Rohingya who are required to take permission to marry if they want to marry. And they can only have 2 children. And if you have more children, these children will become illegal or blacklisted, or parents have to pay fine or sentenced to jail to 5 years. If you marry without permissions, you will go to the prison for 2 years. And to get all these permissions, it is not easy. You need to pay a lot of money to the different authorities to obtain this money and this certificate. So for poor parents and poor people, they cannot get married, and they have no option left to send their young daughters to country abroad through traffickers and through boats. Those are extremely dangerous. And all of these were happening after 1990s. And there are many other things that they have actually introduced, like expulsions of people from their village, grabbing their land and all of it, restricting their businesses, basically destroying the businesses and disallowing Rohingya to be able to do any sort of business, or disallowing to get healthcare, to go to hospital. Basic thing, denying educations. Children cannot go to the higher education, like universities. And they created a situation that people cannot even go to the primary school or secondary school, let alone higher education, the universities. And throughout these processes, they also introduced other abusive patterns, such as arbitrary arrest and killing, and the rape. Before the massive violence attack happened in 2012, 2016, and 17, rape, the use of sexual violence was there against the Rohingya women and against many other ethnic communities' women to destroy the community's dignity and to dehumanize the communities, these groups as a whole. So women were being raped in front of their fathers or their husband or their mothers, and military would just go in the villages and they would rape women. And these were like just normal. And then since 20 newly elected, we have a first election after a few decades, and then we have a quasi-civilian government, where a new government put in place a lot of so-called political, economics, and administrative reform to transform Myanmar, according to them. And the social media was introduced in the Facebook to Myanmar, and Atrocity continued to be committed to other ethnic minorities, and it was intensified when the democratic transition happened after democratic transition in 2011. The fighting in Rakhine State was intensified in 2011, and then violence attacks against the Rohingya began in 2012, and Facebook and social media was a key tools that military utilized to promote hate propaganda against Rohingya people so that they can turn the Burmese majority against Rohingya, creating them as enemy of the state, as a threat to the state, and as a group that is not that doesn't meet human status. So basically, inferior groups and ugly, dirty, they would use all the words that they can, and we have to remember that genocide cannot happen without a genocidal society. When the majority is complicit or say silent to those injustice, and it is that enables the perpetrators to continue with their agenda, and that's what we witness in Burma and in the Holocaust. And these are some of the examples that how influential leaders, religious leaders to the other, the military leaders and civilian leaders were promoting hate against the Rohingya by using traditional media and social media. And it was in 2020, so after, along with all of this hate campaign, and then there was a violence, there was a rape case campaign in one of the cities in Rakhine State, a rape against the Buddhist Rakhine, and according to the military, was raped by 3 young Rohingya Muslim men, and they didn't even say Rohingya Muslim men, and these young Buddhists, according to the phrasing of the rape case on the social media, right after the rape case was happened, and the next day in the morning, for some reason, the news was all over. Rakhine State is, we have to remember that Rakhine State is extremely isolated. In the rural area, it is not easy to get information out right away. But this case was suddenly out all over Burmese media and social media, including by the military spokesperson and etc., portraying that the young Buddhist woman was raped by 3 Bengali Muslim men. And there are many other derogatory sentences around this rape case. We still didn't have independent trial for these cases, and that was the spot of the violence attack. And people get so mad at Rohingya, and they think it endorses the propaganda that was happening, that Rohingya were a threat to the Burmese populations or Buddhist populations. And then violence attack begins in 2012 in Rakhine State. And it actually spread not only in Rakhine, but also throughout the country. At least 19 cities were affected. Actually, violence, people like attacking each other or killing each other happened. In one incident, in a city called Mektila, 33 young Muslim kids were burned alive by the mob, including Buddhist monk. A lot of burning of villages spread to the entire country against other Muslims as well. But then it stopped, and then the hate were more directed towards the Rohingya, and situations in Rakhine State started to deteriorate. And in 2013, 3,000 Rohingya were internally displaced, and they're still living in internally displaced person camps, like in apartheid-like conditions in Rakhine State, segregated from the rest of the Buddhist population. A lot of people were murdered and torched their villages and home. My very own auntie lost her house, and it was taken by the Rakhine neighbor, Rakhine Buddhist neighbor, from her, and she can no longer go back to her home. It was a historical house from her husband's side. Her husband was the mayor of the city during and after the British period, and they had this historical black house. And I remember visiting them when I was very young. Was taken away. So it was not just that the Rohingya villages and houses were torched, but also looted. Their properties and houses were looted. And the campaign continued to escalate, and it was in actually, so I highlighted 2017 here, but it was 2016 violence attack happened once. So there were some Rohingya young guys, they started to, I wouldn't say revolt, but they organized themselves, and according to the military media, they attacked the police stations and police. And then as a retaliation, according to them, responding to these attacks, they launched this operation called clearance operation. And along with that, in 2016, the military launched this widespread massacre and burning houses, schools, and committed sexual and gender-based violence, sexual violence, rape, gang rape, and mutilation. And in 2016, about 100,000 people had to flee to Bangladesh. And in 2017, it was a 5-time or 10 times bigger than what happened in 2016. So more than 800,000 people had to flee within a period of 1 month. Over 800,000 had to flee barefoot and walk, flee for their life, walk barefoot for weeks to get to the border by crossing mountains, river, jungles, everything. And there are many stories that people not only wasn't able to take anything that belonged to them, but also in most cases, mother has to decide which children she can take, because she can no longer travel with carrying a lot of children. And that was the hardest part of the families and women that experiences and that had to flee during this period. So these were some photos how they had to flee, and they were crossing, paddy fields and jungles and river, and it was devastated. And about 400 villages were burned. It was third of the Rohingya villages in northern Rakhine State. So basically, they were able to remove or expel vast majority of the Rohingya from their home. And and the killing, indiscriminate killing, and the use of sexual violence, rape, gun rape was one of the key tactics that they used. And then we have now about 1 million Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, and the military were not held. The military leaders who were responsible for these crimes against Rohingya were not held accountable, and these military staged a coup in 2021, February, so 2 years ago. The country's people, especially young people, responded to this illegal and illegitimate coup with a nationwide pro-democracy movement. You will see all the cities of Burma, hundreds of thousands of young people would go out and protest. There was peaceful protest, and the military responded with the violence attack, killings or shooting against these young people, students. And finally, a lot of young people had to make a difficult decision to take arms to defend themselves. So now we have young people revolting against the military with arms. And we are seeing a lot of losses of lives every day. And the simple goal for these young people is to be able to live in freedom and to obtain democracy. Because of this revolution, the junta is still failing to control the entire country. And that is why a lot of us still describe the coup as attempted coup. So ever since the military staged a coup 2 years ago, military has actually murdered 3,200 civilians, now arbitrarily arrested over 21,000 people, mostly young people, including children. And junta executed 4 arrested democracy activists and sentenced about 150 prisoners to death. The junta is also attacking children, killing more than 265 children and detaining over 1,500 children, and using airstrikes and ground attacks against the civilian. And sexual violence is a tactic that they continue to use against the women and LGBTQI community, and mostly in detention and outside as well. And just last week, military launched airstrikes against the civilian in Aziji village in the Zagain region. And that killed about 170, at least 170. That toll are still continuing. 70 people, and majority of the casualties are women and children. And the aerial bombing of the Zagain region marks a sharp escalation of the military's atrocities. And the use of warfare and airstrikes, air warfare and airstrikes. The junta has used this air warfare as one of the main tools to attack civilians and civilian objects. Indiscriminate and targeted aim to indiscriminately target the civilians. And many of the affected communities primarily have been ethnic minorities. Partly because in many ethnic minorities population, there is already existed war. And now that a lot of the young people taking arms to fight against the military are actually residing in those ethnic arms groups areas, territory. So now that there is a more escalations of airstrikes against those areas, and the victims are usually ethnic minorities population. So Sagaing and Mugwe and Mandalay, these are the Burmese majority population, Burmese area, but then like Chin, Shan, and Chin, these are the ethnic minorities area where a lot of the fightings are continuing till today. And right before this 170s casualty by the strike, on 10th April, the military actually launched an airstrike in Chin State where it kills at least 9 civilians, including a pastor and a teacher and a headmaster and including the civil disobedience teachers from the civil disobedience movement, women and children, etc. So these are and all these attacks against and atrocities against civilians has been resulting post displacement of over 1 million civilians since attempted coup. A lot of them are taking refuge in Thailand and in within Myanmar, within conflict affected areas, like area where it's controlled by the ethnic arms organization. But these refugees or internally displaced persons are denied to access security, safety, or other forms of aid in most places. And that put them at further risks of atrocities, including sexual violence. Meanwhile, the new policies or resumptions of policies against the Rohingya put in place in Rakhine State against the remaining 600,000 Rohingya and 140,000 Rohingya confined in internally displaced person camp. The junta has actually arrested and detained over 2,700 Rohingya. That is very, very conservative number. The only numbers that we were able to collect from open sources from social media. And that includes over 860 women, including children, since the attempted coup, for traveling from Rakhine to outside of the state, basically for simply trying to escape the genocide, and they are being chased and followed and attacked and arrested. It was when they were being chased and caught by the military. There are many incidences that people were being actually killed rather than arrested and being detained and sentenced to 2 years or 5 years, depending on the cases. And also there are ongoing fightings in Rakhine State with an ethnic organization called Arakan Army and the junta, the military. So Rohingya are caught in between the fighting as well. And by both parties, they don't see Rohingya, they don't provide any protection to their Rohingya. Rohingya are easy target for any kind of blame or just in general. There is no hope for a safe and voluntary and dignified return of the over 1 million refugees in Bangladesh who are living in a very deplorable condition, facing so many restrictions at the moment in the Bangladesh refugee camps. They've been there for over 5 years, and some of them are over 10 years. Some of them are over 30 years. Refugees from some left over refugees from 1970s or 1990s are still there. They're living in limbo without any hope for their future. And I remember Mariam saying, nobody wants to take our people, and that's where Rohingya situations is right now. Nobody want to provide protection and support, let alone taking them to resettlement or helping them to be able to return to their home. I was telling to the government officials, including in the US, that if you cannot provide protections or provide support or take the refugees, then you need to help us to be able to return home, and you need to do all necessary work to create, to enable a safe return for these people. So, ever since the military coup, there is a silver lining. The resilience of the revolutions gave us a hope, and military people of the countries are united by the common enemy, the military, and common goal for the Federal Democratic Union. There are a lot of, although people are, people are being targeted every day, risking their life for further atrocities, and those in exile, risk detention and post-deportation. There is still hope for the reconciliation among the communities and transitional justice processes in federal democratic future. The ethnic solidarities for Rohingya give us some hope, although it is not very widespread, but still it was non-existent before the 2021. So this gives us some hope, and I think there's still a lot of awareness and a lot of discussions need to happen so that we can actually bring justice and build equal and peaceful future for all communities, including for the Rohingya and domestically in Burma. So what should the United States and the international community do? There has been some support and some sanctions by the US and other Western countries, but it is not enough. I think the way the international community is taking approach towards the Burma needs a revision, and we need a more comprehensive and concerted and coordinated approach and actions to Burma. Leaving Burma to ASEAN is not a solution. The Western countries are saying that ASEAN will address, ASEAN, this is your region and you guys can handle it. It's been over 2 years now. The ASEAN wasn't able to make any progress or do anything for Burma. So it is important that US look beyond the 5-point ASEAN consensus and impose a more strategic and coordinated sanctions against the military, including sanctioning the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise and banning all arms and aviation fuel supplies to the military. Security Council has adopted a resolution last year, December. However, resolution doesn't have any concrete actions or effective accountability mechanisms. So we think that Security Council need to uphold its mandates for responsibility to protect and women's peace and security agenda, and use power under the UN Charter to really stop the violence, atrocities in Burma, and to hold the perpetrators of these international crimes, such as genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity accountable. It is not easy, we understand, given the dynamic in the UN Security Council, but I think it is essential that the Security Council, especially led by US, the UK, and the France, need to try to adopt the resolutions. If they cannot adopt the resolution in the UN Security Council, according to their resolution introduced by Liechtenstein last year, if Security Council practice veto, that issue can be brought to the UN General Assembly, and the UN General Secretary of the UN General Assembly called for a meeting and basically come up with the actions. So I think this is a new vehicle and they should be using it. And at the same time, while we need a stronger actions from the international community and from the United States, we really need to support the communities so that they can stand for themselves and they can defend themselves and they can sustain themselves. So supporting local civil society communities, including women and youth group and democracy movement as a whole, it's essential. Also, enabling cross-border aid through the civil society organization is essential at this point. Thank you very much. I look forward to your question.
Start in the room. We got some online questions. Bob, we can start.
Thanks. It's a broad question, but maybe give us a little bit of an idea of what the politics are that are preventing the international community stepping in and helping in a more meaningful way. What is it that's keeping countries out or not doing enough?
Okay. Yeah.
Well, how would you like to? You want to do one question at a time, or do you want to?
Either way.
Did you have
My question is somewhat different. I would like to go back to the 1960s and learn more about the ideology that was used to justify the beginning of the campaign and the Rohingya, especially from a Buddhist perspective. What was the justification? It was just pure and simple military power and we do what we want.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what was the ideology?
Yeah.
Okay,
let's do this. To answer your question, gentlemen, I think it's a political will from the U.S. government and other Western governments. It was non-existent before 2021. When genocide was happening, they showed some symbolic sympathy and empathy, but they take no action to prevent the genocide. For greater goods, democracy. And I reminded the US government and other governments that we cannot build democracy with the bones and blood of minorities or people. When genocide is happening, you cannot simply dismiss or ignore the imminent and the importance and the seriousness of these crimes. But there was little to no action taking place. And after the coup 2021, they realized that they have probably mistaken and had a wrong strategy. So now there are more actions put in place. Basically, the US government finally recognized the Rohingya genocide as genocide and imposed several series of sanctions, the US, UK, Canada, France, and EU, but they're not coordinated and comprehensive like the way they responded to the Ukraine. It is one, there's not enough public support as well, so I think that's why the university students, scholars, people of these countries are key to hold your leaders and politicians accountable, sending them questions, writing a letter to them. What are you doing to stop atrocities in Burma? So these are important actions we need for Ukraine. There's a lot of awareness and empathy from the public to the government. So one is political awareness among the civilian. Two is I think it's about political will and political interest. For Burma, probably the US and other Western governments doesn't see that it's a politically they have a lot of political interest in that country. Therefore, I think actions are not very coordinated. And it's very siloed. Although there are some coordinations happening these days, but it's still very siloed. And there is not enough interest to basically take action. So I think if leaders governments who have power to make changes, if they don't act on the basics of principles, not on the basics of their political interests or country's interests, we will see repetitions of these atrocities, crimes everywhere. And yeah, I think the only solution is we really need to hold the leadership in this country, accountable on the basics of principle. It is difficult for us, but I think it is a must to stop atrocities and genocide across the world. Otherwise, dictators and people in power learn from each other. They become smarter and they repeat for their power. Yeah, and to your questions, in 1960s, 70s, the military's ideology was to maintain their power and military dictatorship, they have to use some hooks. Their ideology they were introducing was Buddhist Burman supremacy. So they were using these divide and conquer tactics and pretending to favor Buddhist Burman majority. And brainwashing them they are superior than other groups. Therefore, these other groups deserve lesser rights and superior groups deserve more rights. So that was the strategy, and it has been spread through the education system, through the media and other propaganda, through the actual practices of the structural discrimination that was happening in the institutions. For example, the military leaderships are only Buddhist Burman. If they are from other religion, they may not get the higher ranking position. If they're Muslim, they will get nothing. And in a other kind of like positions in other government departments, it is always Buddhist Burman ethnic who got the top. And later on, it's become even more severe. The leaderships in different departments, different ministries become all military on top of Buddhist Burman. So there's a lot of social hierarchy that they have created. And when that was a culture for several decades, it's normalized among, it's been it's become a normal and it's normalized among the population. Then the population itself, was kind of, still there, kind of enjoying that hierarchy, social hierarchy. So if they come from the ethnic minority, if they're Christians, if they're other religions, then they will be seen as second class or third class. And since 2012, Rohingya were seen as like basically enemy of the state and outsiders, complete outsiders. While we were all equal at some point as we build the country. So that was the that's how gradually the ideology and policies and practices were developed, and violence attack led to the violence attack of the many ethnic communities, especially the Rohingya. And this was quite justified. Until today, a lot of people believe that Rohingya Rohingya are not citizens and they don't deserve equal rights or rights in Burma.
We'll return to the room because I know we have some questions here. We do have one online, so I want to democratize this a little bit between the online and in the room.
The online question is, what is the role of women in the pro-democracy rebellion in the country? Are women fighting on the front line?
Yeah, so, Burmese society was highly patriarchal. looking at the Burma, the military's structure itself. However, women were always at the forefront of the democracy movement, not only, but also in 1988 and all other resilient protests and movement against the military. However, women's roles are often dismissed as usual. But today I'm proud to say that it was women, young women who came out at the beginning of the protest and revolution itself. And they continue to be at the forefront of the revolution. They are also leading a lot of the armed struggles as well. So, and they are taking many roles, not only the leadership roles in peaceful protests, but also in their armed struggles. At the same time, they become the first responders to the conflict affected areas. They are the one providing a lot of the humanitarian assistance and services and safe housing and protection to the women and children on the ground. They are actually the first line responders to the conflict and atrocities in Burma. I'm in awe of all of these courageous women in Burma, and I'm deeply inspired by their determination, commitment, resilience, and courage to continue fight against these brutal dictators.
Okay, show of hands, we'll go 1, 2, 3. Go ahead.
I kind of wanted to add a couple of things. So I am from Myanmar. One thing about the international involvement is that there is a big thing called China, which has been supporting the military with arms economically too, and with technology as well. That includes during the military coup, they're shutting down of internet usage and things like that. China technology was the one that was being used. And if US were to get involved, that will also be openly in conflict with what China is doing. And the United Nations is the same thing. You have a veto power by the Chinese. So every time this kind of issues were brought up, it was being vetoed. Another thing that I wanted to mention is the history of colonialism. And that is something that we need to keep in mind when we're asking the Western country to get involved, is that this complexity on the ground. No question about 1960, actually there was a movement in the Western Rakhine State was trying to make that area into becoming East Pakistan, which also has, because historically the Rohingyas sided with the British government when the Burmese majority were trying to get independent. So there was this history of conflict. And so in the 60s, when the military took over the country, when the first coup d'etat happened in the 60s, that was what they did as a part of retaliation. So the history is very complex, and it's not, we cannot imagine from a Western lens. We also have to put in the lens of colonialism and the rich history behind.
Yeah, I mean, those are quite valid comments, and thank you for the contribution. One interesting thing about China is that they were more proactive and at the Security Council, and I mean they're still proactive, but they were more aggressive and defensive of the military until the coup. After the coup, they become a bit smarter. Actually, they are not very. They're stepping back a little bit. They don't show a lot of public support to the military anymore. While their support for other like technology, their businesses are continued with the military and with the previous government, but they publicly they try to present themselves as a more moderate and neutral in the current coup after the coup. That's very interesting. I also believe that's because they realize that their businesses or their economy will be disrupted if they publicly show support to the military. It is also because after the revolution began and young people, protesters were like basically challenging China and targeting Chinese like gas pipeline and other key economic zone in the country. Maybe part of it is because of it. And so they become a bit careful how they support the military. But the Russia is a big problem. So it is able to build a really more stronger communication or engagement relationship with Russia, which Russia is also at this point desperate to get any kind of connections and allies. So they are able to build more, I guess, deeper connections and relationship with China, and probably getting more military support like weapons and etc. from Russia than China. And that's the dynamic, and Chinese position is super interesting for us. I think I did want to add to that, add about on that. When it comes to colonialism, I completely agree that there is a lot of complexity. People in Burma has a lot of mixed and wrong information, and when it comes to the matters related to the ethnic and religious minorities, not only against the Rohingya, but also many other ethnic communities. And in the case of Rohingya have been living in that land, in Arakan, forever, even before it was drawn as a Burmese territory. It was British who drew the territory, right? And then people who become part of Burma, you know, Indian or Pakistani or Bengali, you become outsiders from the perspective of Burmese people because of the propaganda that they put in place that Burma only belongs to the Buddhist Burman majority who look like, you know, who look like more, who will come from more Mongoloid or Tibeto-Burman tribes from the north. And that's how people were brainwashed. And in early 60s, when many ethnic communities take arms to fight against the military at that time for their equal rights, some of the Rohingya also took arms, and they also created this armed struggle movement called Mujahideen movement. But then they were the first one to actually to have a peace agreement with the military. It wasn't the same military, the previous the parliamentary democracy leaders, and they got what we call peace agreement. And at that time, along with that peace agreement, Rohingya were promised to be given territory. How do we call it? Mayu frontier territory dedicated to the Rohingya population where Rohingya are located, and that division, Mayu Frontier Division, that will be directly administrated by the federal government, not the state government. And that was some agreement happened, but then that agreement or promise was never fulfilled. And ever since, Rohingya will continue to be marginalized, dehumanized, and persecuted, and created to be portrayed to be as outsiders.
So we got a few minutes left, so I think we'll just do rapid fire and then you can respond to everyone. Juliana, I saw Jacob and Chris. How about just 1, 2, 3 quickly, then you respond to whatever.
Thank you for the great conference and for the topics that are so germane and so right from the moment. I'm German by heritage and I'm a scholar in Myanmar. So this was a very rich morning for me, and I would just like to make a few remarks, if I may. It seems that human history has caught us in the cycle of always looking at things from the yeah, we also need to look at the kind of communities that create those actors. And I would like to emphasize here one element that has been sort of unspoken, and that is the element of fear. That is to say, majorities in these genocidal contexts also live in a condition of fear. We must not forget that, because it is from that fear that militaries and governments and nationalists derive their power. And so we need to look at the constellation of race, nationalism, religion, and fear that create genocidal situations, I think. And perhaps that might give us an entree into interventions, how to preempt that from happening again and again and again. Thank you.
Jacob, did you want
My
Thank you,
question-
Juliana.
My question was about the British period, and the impacts of first colonization and decolonization. There was one thing you had said that really kind of stuck with me. You said your Andy's house was a former British like historical site. I believe it's been talked about a little bit, but it sounds like the legacy of the British period is still part of this. Is that speak to that at all?
So before British left, there was a conflict happened between the Buddhist Rakhine and Muslim Rohingya. So indeed, British has also these divide and conquer tactics, right? So they used to favor minority Rohingya to control the Buddhist Rakhine majority. And because of this, the divide and rule tactics, was tension happened between two communities, and the massive violence happened between two communities. There were killing and loss of life from both sides. And two communities were kind of demographically isolated, how do I say that? Divided. So Rohingya from central and southern part of Rakhine moved to northern Rakhine State for their protections, and Rakhine from northern part of Arakan, where Rohingya majority are living right now, moved to southern part of Rakhine State. So for one example, my grandma families came from Rau. So they were living, there was a village called Rohingya village in Rau. They were living in Rau, and some other part of their relatives were living in Bembia. So it's southern side of Rakhine. They all moved to Budidong and Mongol, where right now we are living, and my grandma is there. But we still have some relatives over there, but a lot of them moved here. The same, likewise, the Rakhine from Mongol, Budidong, Sijoy, Ratayang, they moved to the southern part of Rakhine. So that was a demographic change and shift. And then the violence that happened and the killing and the loss of life, and people have a lot of grievances. So military, and actually not only the military, but also ethnic Rakhine leaders who were promoting hate and using this as a tool to obtain their popularity or power. They're basically using this historical grievances and the complex historical background that was rooted with the legacy of the British colony. And that is real. And instead of rather than de-escalating those grievances, promoting equality, military has utilized it for their own benefit. And talking about personal encounter, my uncle was actually killed a few months ago by the military, targeted killing. And a lot of our family members were affected, and a lot of our cousins become refugees in Bangladesh. The divisions and the discrimination that was introduced over the period of several decades, it's unbelievable. It's incredible. And I left Rakhine when I was like 7, 8 years old in my primary school. I wasn't able to go back to my hometown because of the restriction that was put in place. So I wasn't able to see my grandparents or cousins at all. It was in 2015, we were able to go back with the electoral campaign. My father ran a political party. So he was able to, although Rohingya were disenfranchised, I didn't cover here during the 2014 and 15. I was able to go back in 2015, and I realized how the mindset of the people and how the nature of the discrimination is just internalized, even among the Rohingya. And there were so many incidences that I realized it was so different from when I was young. Although there was some discrimination, it's not as bad as what I had to witness in 2015 before 2017 and 16 attacks. One example, when I was taking the boat, carrying like ferry boats, it was the Rohingya boat owner. And there were three Buddhist ladies came come on the boat. And then they didn't pay when they get off. And then it was one time, and then another time, because two other people came in our return. I encountered like several times, and I noticed this is something. Why are they? And I asked the owner, I don't know owner or how do you call it, but I asked him whether they are their friend, and that's why they didn't give the money. And he said it's normal. I mean, some Rakhine or some population would pay, but some people wouldn't just pay for their services or even for buying goods and stuff. So it's normal, you know. And there was a lot of checkpoints, and it is only the Rohingya who are stopped in the middle of the checkpoints and check their identity card and all of it by the security forces, not the other way. And they even internalized it in a way that they try to describe the Rakhine, ethnic Rakhine, as Danyenda, which is indigenous populations, and Rohingya and Bengali, right? And then it wasn't there when I was young, right? And now my people were calling them the ethnic Rakhine as Danyenda, indigenous, and they themselves are like basically adopting this community culture, internalizing it without even knowing, unconsciously, and which is just scary and deeply saddening for me even before 2017. Incredible.
All right. Well, thank you, Wai Wai. That's time. We're going to resume at 1:45. And for people who teach this content, just so you know, Wai Wai was a fellow at the USHMM, through an online program that I built here with you, and helped develop a fantastic online exhibition called Burma's Path to Genocide, which I use as a teaching tool. And so anyone teaching this stuff, I suggest that it's interactive, great for students, and so happy that you came here.
Thank you. And it's online. Please go and visit online exhibition as well. They have physical exhibition in DC. If you happen to go to DC, they have it as physical exhibition, and online. Feel free to visit anytime.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.